Good morning. Let's try that again. Good morning. Is this on?
Yeah, it's on. You're on.
So, no matter who you are or where you are on your spiritual journey, you are celebrated here. So we begin in silence to affirm our faith that we are aware that we live in the heart of sacred mystery and that this sacred mystery seeks to find expression who we are. So if it's helpful to close your eyes, you can do that. Otherwise, these words. May grace be in our heads and in our thinking. May grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. May grace be in our ears and in our hearing. May grace be in our mouths and in our speaking. May grace be in our hearts and in our understanding. And may grace be at our end and at our departing. And may what we do here help us to grow in patience, compassion, tolerance, and may all on this planet benefit from what we do here today. Amen. So I said that.
I don't even try to
I'm
keep
skipping
up.
over the things I already said. Mm-hmm. Okay. The title that we have given this time today is Nothing, Nobody, Nowhere. We're teaching our way through the texts that in the Christian tradition are known as the Beatitudes. And I've asked Dr. Holly Hudley to join me because we did a version of this
5 years ago.
5 years ago together, sitting here, but none of you were here. And I don't know about you, but nothing that we said then can we reuse.
Yeah, in fact, this week I didn't even look at what we wrote 5 years ago.
I have.
You did?
It's not very good. Well, it's not that it's not very good. It was good then, but it's not very good for now.
Yeah.
Because we're different.
Yeah.
And our context is different.
Yeah. And
another reason I wanted Holly to be here was because I think we need a balance for the out-of-control masculinity that is happening in our culture. There was no greater example of this than when the leaders of our armed forces were gathered this week and all were told that our new Secretary of War that from now on the goal and measurement for worthy service in the armed forces would be the ideal male model. So one of my favorite cartoonists for the New Yorker had this cartoon. And by the way, that meeting was labeled by the people who convened it as a come to Jesus meeting. Now you do know that Jesus is called the Prince of Peace, not the Prince of War. So immediately after that, I got online and bought both a hat and a t-shirt. Now, my beautiful bride says, you're going to get shot for wearing this stuff in public. But, and I have had a little pushback in some places, been called nice names. But I'll wear it. Maybe I'll wear it here. Not in a worship service. Okay. So these are the texts. We combined 3 of the Beatitudes for today to deal with. You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there's more of God and God's rule.
You're blessed when you feel you've lost what is most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one most dear to you.
You're blessed when you're content with just who you are. No more, no less. That's the moment you find yourselves proud owners of everything that can't be bought.
Mm-hmm. So one of my hopes today is to convey how much of a paradigm shift the Beatitudes are, both when they first kind of dropped into the world or into our collective consciousness, and as we are meant to continue interpreting them today. They were about a cosmological shift in human behavior. The social context of Jesus' world was not so unlike ours, actually. It was characterized by a patriarchal family structure, significant social stratification where the wealthy elite ruled and the poor were heavily taxed and oppressed, and a divided political system between pagan Roman kings and prefects on the one side and aristocratic religious Jewish leaders on the other. And among both, but specifically among the Jewish population, there were even further divisions between the various sects. The culture in which Jesus lived was a domination system. That was true before Jesus' time. It's been true since. There's an author, Riane Eisler, who says that we've been in a domination system for at least 3 millennia. So we don't have the sort of history to know what a collaborative system could look like. They existed, and they were thought to be mostly pre-literate. But since the advent of the written word and the value of logos over pathos, we have existed more in a domination system. So the outcasts, I just skipped way ahead of myself because I kept my thing going. Anyways, so in that domination system, we just need to now, today, apply it and look no further than what's being said by the current administration. Bill mentioned the Department of War, America First rhetoric, calling opponents evil and hateful, migrants criminals, black women moronic, targeting transgender and non-binary folks. These are domination behaviors. During Jesus' time, purity culture emphasized the following values: cleanliness, righteousness, maleness, Jewishness, wealth and health, and taxes, paying taxes. Outcasts were considered unclean, female, largely because of menstruation, and the poor, who were somehow deserving of their station in life because they were unclean and didn't pay taxes. So when Jesus announces, "Blessed are the poor," you can imagine how people held their pearls and said, "Oh, dear Lord, no. They grow their own food and they don't pay taxes and they're unclean." We wanted to make this, if we were both having struggles getting beyond the literal context of poverty. That's not what we're going to talk about today. But in contrary to traditional interpretations, the teachings we're dealing with are not about idealizing that suffering, but about challenging the systems that require some to suffer, while others do not, challenging the systems that allow some to belong while others do not. It's kind of about saying, wait, everything we thought we understood about who is good and pure and holy is misguided. So it challenges the idea that there's something we need. These sayings challenge the idea that there's something we need beyond the true self and beyond a deep regard for the other to achieve God. Jesus indicts and challenges the patriarchal domination system for a much more radical one that prioritizes justice and compassion. I talked about those last week as 2 incredibly feminine values, a compassionate justice. So what does it mean to be poor in spirit, to lose everything, and be content with your own being? This is what we're going to try to speak to today. It would be arrogant of me, maybe not Bill, to assume you are much older than I am, so you've earned the right to be right. It'd be arrogant of us to assume that
Only chronologically.
That's right, not age, not heart, on your heart. We don't have the complete answer, but I think we're trying to guess that the meaning goes against individualism and domination. This is an invitation into a present spiritual reality, an inner transformation instead of some future reward, emphasizing again Jesus' consistent teaching that the kingdom of God is here, now, and among us on earth. It's also true that when we align with those who are marginalized and disregarded by social standards, that there's a risk to our own belonging. And I guess this is the honest inquiry to have with yourself, is what are you willing to risk to stand with those who have been marginalized in order to transform the world? To create a world where the powerless are empowered, we begin to see, and this is what I hope to weave together, how the inner and the outer worlds, that transformation is not so separate.
Okay. Try not to go to sleep during this part. Last week I said that I wanted consistency to lift up three things as we go through this teaching. And those three things are biblical literacy, historical setting, and relevancy for us. And what I want to talk about right now is this biblical literacy part. There is no translation of an event, concept, or experience from one language to another that can be made without some distortion. Jesus spoke Aramaic. We'll get to why it's written in Greek in a minute. But when you translate from one language to another, something gets lost. Further, the people who wrote both the writings that we have in the Hebrew Scriptures and in the Christian collection wrote what they wrote on goat skin. And they had a belief that the world was flat. So they didn't have our cosmological worldview nor our technology available. So getting from what was said, what was meant, what was heard, and what is relevant is work. And that, thank goodness, is what we have scholars for, who can devote their time and energy to doing that kind of work. I am still learning things about these teachings. And I've been at this game for a little while. And arrogantly, I thought I knew a lot of it. And any spiritual practice has this combination of being exhilarating and humiliating. Any spiritual practice. Because if you sit, one of the things you're guaranteed to learn is that you can't do it. It's humiliating. So one of the errors that fundamentalists make is they got the answer. They know it. But there's, I think, a mark of humility to say, I don't know this stuff. I'm still struggling to try to learn it. So a case in point are these very verses. I thought I knew this material until I ran into this book, The Sermon on the Mount and Human Flourishing, a theological commentary by Jonathan Pennington. I doubt any of you in this room have ever heard of this book. It won many awards in the theological community, and I am not recommending this book because you would need to know Hebrew and Greek in order to understand it. It's very academic. But I've found it to be so very helpful. It's not a very long book, under 400 pages, but each chapter has footnotes that are as long as the chapter. I just finished a chapter that had 42 footnotes that took up 12 pages.
I just want to point out most people don't read as fast as you, too. You hand me a book that's like, it's only 152 pages and it takes me 3 weeks to read because I fall asleep at night when I'm reading. And it took you 2 days.
I think it's part of my condition.
Maybe, yeah.
But I'm reading this book and I think, oh wow, I never thought of that. I never saw that. I never made that connection before. So these verses that we are attempting to interpret are part of a 3-chapter set in Matthew. There are 5 blocks in Matthew to match the 5 books of the Torah. And It is the most commented part of the New Testament in existence. There have been more books written about the Sermon on the Mount than about any other part of the New Testament. And the author of this book says, without exception, one's reading of the sermon says much about one's understanding of Jesus and about Christian theology. So the author of this book claims that the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' answer to the greatest metaphysical question humanity has faced. And that is, how can we experience human flourishing? What is happiness, or shalom in Judaism? And how does one sustain that? That's what this Sermon on the Mount is about, and the Beatitudes are an introduction to the rest of the sermon. So the key to understanding the teaching in the Sermon on the Mount is to be found in that there are two very distinct, this is where you need to stay awake. There are two very distinct cultures that come together at the time of Jesus. Jesus was a Jew. And in Judaism, there was the belief that God would someday restore Judaism to its proper place. The Jews had experienced exile and being captive and being defeated. And the Jewish temple, which was the center of Judaism, was destroyed about 600 BC. So there was exile. You feel like you're in exile now? We can identify with this a lot of ways. So there was no temple for a long time, but there was a longing for a temple. The Jewish temple got rebuilt. And the temple was rebuilt, and it was the center of Jewish life at the time of Jesus. And the hope was that at some point, although the Jews were now under Roman domination, that God would obliterate that rule and the Jews would come back into power. There is nothing that New Testament scholars agree on any more than that Jesus preached about the kingdom of God. They all agree with that. There is nothing that New Testament scholars disagree about more than what he meant. But you're lucky. I have the answer, so I'm going to... I believe that Jesus, when he said the kingdom of God was coming, he really meant that Judaism was going to be brought back. Jesus was executed in year 30 or so. The Jews around Jesus believed that that was going to happen, and it didn't. The temple, the heart of Judaism, was destroyed again in 60. Okay? So on the one hand, you have this Jewish belief in the resurrection and the restitution of the people of Israel. However, the temple is destroyed. That didn't happen, and the Greco-Roman influence began to grow. So on the one hand, you have this Jewish influence, and on the other hand, you have this Greco-Roman influence, and the Greco-Roman influence was all about virtue. You have a lot about virtue in the Beatitudes. Mm-hmm. So these two things come together in the Sermon on the Mount. And frankly, it's very difficult to sort out what is what. Mm-hmm. But it is important to know that Jesus spoke Aramaic. The Bible he read was in Hebrew. But by the time the New Testament was written, the Greco-Roman influence was so strong that the Christian documents were written in Greek. Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, English.
That was definitely
That's quite a shift.
Yeah.
So, By the way, when in the New Testament you hear them talking about the end of the world, they don't mean the end of cosmos. They mean the end of Roman domination. Mm-hmm. That would be the end of the world. And that's what they were prepared for, and thinking, this is surely going to happen. But it didn't. And so the followers of Jesus had to redefine what the kingdom of God meant. That's my current thinking about what this is about. I went off script.
I know, but you need to say that part.
What?
So you crack me up.
So the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount, including the Beatitudes, express a longing for the completion or restoration of God's people and how one could flourish no matter what one's outer circumstances were.
I'm going to say two things. One is, every week when we talk and we prepare this, Bill says, I could never do this without a script. I have no idea where he was this whole time, and yet he did it without a script and said everything that needed to be said. So I'm just going to point that out. Next time we're not going to use a script. We're just going to do this. And the second thing is, right around preceding the teachings of Jesus was Plato. And I tend to think that Jesus was a Platonist. Plato's philosophy was based on Socrates' teaching. Socrates was illiterate.
Well, that's what I meant by the Greco-Roman influence. I just didn't say it that well.
Yeah, and Plato's entire school was about pursuit of the good, pursuit of the divine. And so there was a ladder of kind of similar to the Beatitudes, behaviors that would get you to the good. And the Jews put it in a divine or God context. The Platonists put it in a sort of God's context, what gods can show us how to climb this ladder. So the process of becoming no one, needing nothing, or going nowhere is iterative and ongoing. Even though we're going nowhere, you keep doing it over and over and over again. Seen through the lens of Jungian psychology, we have what we might call an epiphany, a realization of what I am doing is no longer working. And we're faced with a choice. Robert Frost said it this way: 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. We can keep doing what we've always done and inevitably run into the same wall again and again and again, or we can get curious. And if we choose curiosity, we enter into another phase, the second phase of kind of enlightenment, which is education or learning. That's, I think, what our role is here, right? We're with you in this kind of education or learning phase. Again, we can stay here, take that information in at the head level, and establish some basic understanding of why things are and why we are the way we are. Or we're faced with another fork in the road. And this is the process of elucidation, which is taking what we know in the head into the heart level, applying it to our lives, changing behaviors. In this stage, we might actually practice what we're learning. I didn't say the magic words, not yet. This could look like inner child work. The single greatest gift to me has been the advice to keep a photo of myself at certain ages available. That's me, Supergirl, age 3. Anytime I'm feeling that intense emotion, I look at that little child and I just offer compassion and love, just like a mother would. Roddy Young expanded this practice for me and challenged me to keep childhood pictures of my husband and my children at various ages nearby too, so that I can also practice compassion for them when they're driving me crazy. None of us escapes childhood without some kind of trauma or discord. It's humbling and relieving as a mother to recognize that I, as a mother, will never be exactly enough for my children. We change our childhoods, however, by changing our emotional response to the triggers, to the deep emotional reactions that we might have still today. I mean, everyone tantrums out every now and then, right? That's your inner child at work, right? So responding to the parts of us that want, sometimes rightly, to defend us with compassion. When we get epiphany, education, and elucidation all intertwined together, we get to this fourth stage, which in Jungian terminology is individuation. That's when another layer of ourselves is revealed. In psychology, in Jungian psychology, the number 4 represents wholeness and balance. But to get there, we have to have a certain kind of humility for the fact that we know nothing. Then we experience transformation. The thinning of the veil, when we know things are different, but we can't quite put it into words, but you know you're changed somehow. This happens in big and small ways all of the time, like that spiral stair we talked about last week. We go down, we go back up. All of it is change. We're transforming all of the time. The process of individuation is getting conscious of that. You might have heard it said that the longest journey is the 18 inches between the head and the heart. And it's a mighty tug of war. Any of you who've dealt with a struggling child or a dying loved one or a drowning relationship knows this struggle. What I should do, what my heart longs to do, I think I can make it better, it doesn't get better. How do we get these two to talk to each other? We get gripped by our expectations. This is attachment, right? Psychically, we get deluded by that attachment to certain outcomes rather than a commitment or presence to the process. We need to get out of our own way sometimes, and that's when the path can sometimes reveal itself, when we are at the end of our rope. This is when we come face to face with our own powerlessness. I know I've been there, and we're stubborn creatures. It's really hard to let go of the rope. I share that not because, again, I don't have all the answers, but to elucidate the inquiries and realizations we might face along the way. It occurs to me that individuation, similar to Eugene Peterson's words in his interpretation of Scripture, The Message, that individuation is being content with who you are, no more and no less. It's the unification of the head and the heart, the pathos and logos, masculine and feminine.
So I'm speaking now for both of us, and in a way by saying that I cannot remember a time in recent memory when preparing to teach here has been more difficult and challenging than today. There are a lot of reasons for that, I think. We had so much more that we wanted to offer, and we had to end up cutting so much that we had written out. Not because it wasn't good. It was. It's just that there was so much of it. There's so much to say about nobody, nowhere, nothing. I wanted to address, because the teachings of Jesus are so applicable to our current situation, the gone wrongness of what is going on under the guise of Christian nationalism. So what I'm going to say in one sentence is, any religion that fosters or encourages or blatantly demeans, labels, or marginalizes others, whatever else it calls itself, is not in alliance with Jesus. And it is a growing movement in the United States of America. It ain't going to go away. Wishful thinking is not going to make that happen. What you see happening in our culture is something that some people have been working on for decades, and it's coming to fruition. Mm-hmm. And turning it around is like standing in front of a locomotive and trying to stop it. There was also the temptation, as Holly mentioned, to address the issue of poverty and economic inequality. the last thing Jesus is teaching here is that it is good in any way, shape, form, or fashion to be poor. And there is something woefully gone wrong with any system that fails to actively recognize the worth and dignity of every human being. There's something wrong with a system that doesn't recognize that. So the teachings of Jesus are meant to radically challenge how we behave in our everyday lives. And our country is undergoing a major spiritual crisis. A few weeks ago, I called it our Calvary moment. Those of you who know what Calvary is, know what that's about. But the main reason for the difficulty is the impossibility of putting into words what these teachings are saying. However, that has never stopped me. So let's start now. Jesus was a Jew. And as Richard Rohr states, Jesus was probably the first non-dual teacher in the West. Not in the East, but in the West. Jews didn't have creeds. They had laws. And the first law in Judaism was that God is first, and that anything that gets in the way of that, and the love of God leads to the love of neighbor, anything that gets in the way of God being first is a derailment of the spiritual life. And Jesus was radical about this. We're going to see it as we go through the rest of the database of Stephen Mitchell's construction. I had a teacher years ago who occasionally, when he was giving a lecture, would stop and look at one of us in the class and he would say, "How'd you get in that one?" Meaning that our bodies didn't define us. They were just the spacesuits we used to get around on the planet. "Oh, how'd you get in that one?" He was very Buddhist. He also taught that any label you put on yourself is a trap. Healthy today? Just wait. Young? Just wait. Jesus consistently gives powerful, unequivocal statements about the necessity to relinquish attachments in order to love God with our whole hearts. No one can serve two masters. You cannot love both God and money. Anyone who prefers father, mother, son, or daughter to me is not worthy of me. And on and on and on it goes. He also taught and demonstrated what a life free of detachments looked like. Anybody can come eat with me. I see you for who you are. Come unto me. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. You will find rest for your souls. So I just want to be clear. To follow Jesus is not to be a religious person, but to be a whole human being. This is one of the things I mean by being a trans-religious spiritual teacher in the Christian tradition. Religious systems are not primarily about the human search for truth. Religious systems are primarily about security. Are you saved? And then you're safe, you know. It is the drive for security in one way or another that has made our culture such an addictive one. We are a culture of addicts. So Jesus is saying, you got to step beyond this security-giving religion in order to be fully human. That's why the Jewish authorities were so upset with this man, because he was not supporting their religious system. So the call of Jesus is not a call to be religious. It's not a call to escape life's traumas. It's not a call to find security. It is certainly not a call to find peace of mind, because all those things are invitations to idolatry, and that stands against the first law in Judaism, to have no other gods except the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as they understood that. Now, I can't live this way all the time. I manage a few minutes a day, sometimes more. That's why religious systems have rituals of confession in them. What we don't have a big enough religious ritual in our system for is that of lament. Mm-hmm. 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 And we need that. It is why we are called to live by faith and to have the poverty of spirit that opens the gate to receiving grace. No one ever recovered from any addiction of any kind by themselves. Mm-hmm. You didn't do this on your own. And those who do recover from various addictions, whether they're ingestive addictions or process addictions, will tell you it's a miracle. Amazing grace. Amazing grace. I once was lost, but now I'm found.
Yeah, and it's in some vain way to try and give you 4 steps for how to get from here to here, for how to integrate the outer world with the inner world. I'll do it anyway. It is not an IKEA project with pictures and numbered steps, and those can go haywire anyway. It's more simultaneous, and it's also less linear, with far more parts and pieces and screws and Allen wrenches. So it's also more mysterious. And we don't know what the form is going to be at the end. We're not going to become a desk at the end of this journey. So it's less about doing or saying something correctly than it is about coming into your own being. And that's the individual question to answer. Joanna Macy, who died earlier this year, do you know she died in July? We love her. Yeah, Active Hope, remember doing that book together? So she died at 96, and she was a Buddhist. She wrote that to become Shambhala warriors, we empty ourselves out to contain the pain and also the joy of the world. As we go through our own process, we become a crucible for others. The weapons here are compassion and insight, and the goal is to dismantle the powers of destructive violence and replace it with peace, to supplant domination with collaboration. We cannot do this if we are attached to the desires of the ego or seduced by power. Shambhala warriors adopt the politics of compassion, the very essence of the Beatitudes. In contrast with the politics of purity, which I mentioned earlier, that create radical and sharp social divisions, the politics of compassion dissolve those. They dissolve false boundaries. They're egalitarian and inclusive. I can't think of a moment in my lifetime when we were more readily in need of a politic of compassion. The Sermon on the Mount gives us guidance for this time when it would be so easy to lose our minds. I'm kind of losing mine. But Shambhala warriors, like Jesus, one of the most radical things he did was change his perspective. We go outside of what is familiar. The metaphor of the Sermon on the Mount rather than the sermon in the synagogue, like every other Saturday. Change your perspective. Get out of your comfort zone. Today, there are priests showing up to immigration centers just to stand with people. They're getting out of their familiar. They're going to where the people are. If Jesus were alive today, I assume he might very well find himself in a detention center in need of one of those priests. Then we listen to people's voices, to what they need, not to what we think they need. This is part of self-emptying, of not leading with the ego, being poor in spirit, getting yourself out of the driver's seat. If we are to imagine liberation, and it is my educational opinion that Jesus was a liberation theologist if he was anything else. He wasn't a theologian, but he was about liberation. But we can only get there when we meet each other in the margins, when we go to our edges, when we hold each other's humanity and suffering with tenderness and awe. The other night, maybe 2 weeks ago, when we were leaving one of the last Astros home games, yes, my ego is still attached to the fact that we're not in the postseason. I'll get through that. But there's almost always an older woman in a wheelchair sitting camped out next with her belongings at her feet, near where we park almost every time. For 3 years that I've been a ticket holder, I've never spoken to her. We usually walk right by her, but somehow that night she came into my consciousness and she said, "Who won the ball game?" And my first thought was, oh, she's interested in the ball game? And I stopped, and of course, my love of baseball, I give her the highs and lows, I give her the play-by-play. We chatted about baseball and how her name, Luna, means moon. She asked me my name, then called me dear, and flashed me a brilliant smile. I asked if I could get her anything, and she asked for a Dr. Pepper from a nearby vending machine. It was such a small thing. I didn't change her plight, but our lives intersected for that moment. We each got out of our familiar. This is not about celebrating me spending $1 on someone who didn't have one. Not at all. It's about two wildly different realities coming together for a small moment, a tiny step toward experiencing each other. No more and no less than who we are. To see in some way how I could be Luna and she could be me in another set of circumstances. Bill mentioned lament. We do not have a process for lamenting in this culture. So grieve. Grieve and grieve and grieve some more. Grieve in community. Mourn who and what you've lost. Weep for the ones who hurt. Build altars, light candles, set out childhood pictures of all of our leaders if we can find them. They need our compassion because they're not acting from it. We have so few rituals around grief and loss in this country. And I read once about a tribe in the Philippines who have a word that translates to something like high voltage, but it's not really even that because it's not translatable because it's more of a practice. And the word is liget, and it describes a feeling of rage and sorrow and powerlessness and loss that needs to move through the body. The way that they ritualize this word is to gather around and howl together until the grief is emptied out. They self-empty. Grief is a form of activism. It's a way of drinking the tears of the world. And it's our job, I think, to grieve for the loss of wetlands, the destruction of forests, the decline of the whale population, erosion of the soil, whatever it is, the murder of children in schools. There is such profound wisdom gained in the process of grieving. One of my favorite poets, Naomi Shihab Nye, writes in her poem, Kindness, "Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows." You're going to love this one, Bill. Adopt a daily spiritual practice. This is, we can't become who we are, no more and no less, unless we adopt some form of ritualizing our own practice of being in the world. In the context of compassion and justice as part of a spiritual practice, we could begin by asking, how do I need to live so that others can be free? And before that, it actually just starts with breath. This is the most basic exchange of the inner world with the outer world. And I'm doing a 100-day challenge of the golden flower. It's Jung has a take on this ancient text that is about circular breathing, and it's hard. I get distracted every day. I leave the process and I'm like, oh, I'm not doing it right. Oh, I can't, whatever. Actually intentionally focusing on our breath is just one way to join the inner and the outer worlds, and it can be a challenge. So you see now that we've come full circle. We tend to the world by tending to ourselves, and we tend to the self by being present in the world.
So I had a teacher one time that said, never repeat for emphasis. Understand? Never repeat for emphasis. So I'm going to tell you a story that you've never heard. I've never used it in here before. It's a Zen teaching story. Once upon a time, there was a stone cutter, and he was pretty good at his work. And you could hear him going tap, 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 tap at the mountain from which he got the stones that he made the statues. And his work was really quite good. He did great things. And one day the emperor came by and saw the work that the stone cutter did and said, I command you to make me a statue. And the stone cutter agreed to do that. And as he was doing that, he thought how powerful the emperor is. And I wish I had that power. And he wished it and he wished it and he wished it. And because in stories like this kind of thing can happen, he became the emperor. And so there he was, the emperor, walking around and enjoying his kingdom, telling people to make statues of himself and so forth. And as he walked around, the sun beat down on him so much that he had to take his coat off. And he thought, wow, that is real power. The sun has the power to make the emperor take his clothes off. Oh, I wish I were the sun. I wish I were the sun. And because in stories like this, things like this can happen, he became the sun. And oh, he enjoyed being the sun. He put his rays down on people and made them take off their clothes and jump into water and do all sorts of things. Oh, he loved being the sun. And then one day, a cloud came and blocked the sun from coming to the earth. And the sun said, now that's real power. Anything that can block the sun from reaching the earth, that's power. I wish I were a cloud. Oh, I wish I were a cloud. Then I would be powerful. A cloud can block out the sun. And because in stories like this kind of thing can happen, he became a cloud. And he was just drifting placidly through the sky, lazily enjoying the identity of being a cloud, when one day he went boop and bumped into a mountain. And he thought, now that's real power. A mountain can stop a cloud. Oh, I wish I were a mountain. If only I were a mountain, I could be really powerful. And he wished and he wished. And because in stories like this kind of thing can happen, he became a mountain. At last, he had peace. Immutable, immovable, immortal. Been here since the beginning of time, would be here until the earth ended. He was at peace. And as he was drifting off into sleep, he heard this tap, 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 and looked down, And there was a stone cutter taking stone from him to make a beautiful statue. And so he returned to himself. So may we all. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this: you carry precious cargo, so watch your step, and we'll see you here in 2 weeks. Next week is free breakfast. Come back.